privilege today to talk to Ron Roth, a curator turned author, which is going to be interesting, and one of the featured presenters this year at the T. Very excited to chat with you. His book, The Civil War in the South Carolina Lowcountry, I can't wait to read it.
Well, good, thanks.
Talk to me a little bit about the presentation you're going to do and what our visitors and folks can expect.
Sure, well, this was for me a project that was very exciting. I think if you're a Civil War buff, a history buff, or someone who just wants to know something about the history, especially the Civil War history of this area, Hilton Head and the Bluffton area, this is a good place to be. I'll be at a table, of course, with my books, but
yes.
I'll be doing a presentation there, giving a bit of an overview of what the Civil War in the Lowcountry was about.
How did you get involved in this? I know you're a Pennsylvania young man. So how did you get involved specifically in the Civil War and why here? I mean, obviously you moved here.
Yes, well, when we moved here, both my wife and I were retired or semi-retired. I was working part-time. And I did some freelance work with some museums. And one of the museums was the historic Beaufort Foundation. They said, we have this interesting Civil War unit, the Beaufort Volunteer Artillery. Could you do an exhibit about it? And I said, sure. So I developed this exhibit on this historic artillery group, and we did the exhibit, and I got really deep into the research of the area, and somebody said, hey, why don't you write a book about the Civil War? And I said, well, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So give us a little teaser, if you will, how a Confederate artillery battery and a Black Union regiment defined the war. Share with me a little bit about what that even means.
Yeah, well, it's a really great historic paradox. Beaufort was occupied by Union forces after the Battle of Port Royal. It was the biggest naval battle up to that time. Right out here, you can see it off of Hilton at Port Royal Sound. And so I got interested in that, did that research, and this area during the Civil War, even though it was in South Carolina, was occupied by the Union forces.
Gosh, I don't think a lot of us realize that.
It is, it's you know, so that's the whole story, and I think it's an interesting story that I described in the book. At the same time, during that period, the first African-American Black regiment was recruited right in Beaufort. The very first one in United States history. They fought in the Civil War.
Oh, wow.
And so there's this irony. Beaufort, at one time...
juxtaposition of everything you would think, yes.
Beaufort was one of the hotbeds of secession. In fact, an outfit called the Bluffton Boys from Bluffton was made up of planters who were some of the biggest agitators for seceding from the Union in the decade prior to the Civil War itself. So here you had this hotbed of secession, and then almost overnight it becomes a Union place where Union soldiers are being trained and sent out to fight.
I mean, it is not only fascinating, but it had a shift on the whole entire outcome of the Civil War.
It was very important here. The Union troops that were here, the military part of this, talks about how the Union troops here tried to cut the railroad line between Charleston and Savannah, very important strategic. And the Confederates that were in the diaspora, so to speak here, the Beaufort Volunteer Artillery, were constantly fighting with them to protect that railroad line.
So one of the things that's interesting to me is how you gather the information. This was the Civil War. Where does the information come from? Are there letters? Are there documents?
All the above. One of the best places to find out is the Bureau of History and Archives in Columbia. It has some of the largest collections of Civil War, South Carolina related things. Stephen Elliott, who is the head, the lieutenant of the Beaufort Volunteer Artillery, his letters were there, his original letters. So I went there, read his letters, and then used that as part of the book. Interesting thing though, he was the worst handwriter in the world. So it took me quite a long time to decipher the letters, but that's one of the ways that you get firsthand what they call primary research for a book like that.
Do you start to actually experience what it must have been like and to feel it and kind of discover the richness of that time?
You're exactly right, and that's one of the things of people who live here. You can go to these places that are featured in the book, and you can stand there and kind of visualize this places in Beaufort and other places, and I think that's part of the joy of history and people who, like myself, who are retired and want to get to know a little more about our historical background.
It kind of gives me chills to learn all about this, especially since we live here. And I'm really grateful, Ron, that you came today and chatted with us. We look forward to seeing you on November the 25th.
Great, thank you.
And thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Stay with us.